Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, Madrid. Since they didn't ask, I can do. I want to know, just for curiosity, because I'm Spanish, as some of you might have figured out from my name. But I'll be speaking in English, and it's the second time I do this in a Vue conference in Spain. So I want to know, how many of you do not speak Spanish? OK, more than half. So thank us a lot, actually, for you to come into Spain for a Vue talk. This is really great. I'm not going to talk about myself too much, only that I live in Paris, in France. I also speak French. If you want to come to me speak, just Spanish, French, English are all fine, OK? You can find me online as Posva or on Blue Sky as esm.dev, which are my initials. And today, I have an exciting topic, because I've been part of the core team for a long time, 8 years now. And usually when I have a problem, I try to solve it. I try to find some kind of library to build it up and make this solution more elegant for users. And one I have been delaying for very long, pun intended, is data fetching. Data fetching is something that can be solved in a lot of different ways, because you have different use cases that you want to optimize for. And today I want to offer you a refreshing way to handle async state management, which Pina Colada. But before talking about Pina Colada, I have to talk a little bit about user experience itself. So I want to go back a few years into the past, OK? Or more like a few thousand years. So let's talk about ergonomics. Feng Shui. I think we probably all heard about it. Maybe organizing your bedroom, how to position the bed, the door, et cetera, et cetera. But today, I don't want to talk about that, because of course, 6,000 years ago, they didn't have any digital screens or anything. So the idea of Feng Shui, if it can be summarized into one sentence, is having the best space one in which the arrangement of objects is aligned with the space's flows of energy. In other words, a space that feels well to be in, and just everything is ergonomic inside. But as time passes, we also have other people in other places in the world approaching these ergonomics problem. In Greece, so still before Christ, Hippocrates, so the father of medicine, introduced the concept of these ergonomics around the workspace. So he was more focusing about how does the space flow in the workspace. So we are optimizing this space for a task or for a couple of tasks that are related together. In his scenario, medicine and surgery. And we can go more, we can go on and go on. I'm going to go closer to present, because history of UX is actually longer than you might expect. Last century, in 1955, Henry Dreyfus, which was an industrial designer, I think, I haven't checked my notes too much about this, has this approach, which is very different, because it's going to talk about friction. So we have, for the first time, a negative approach. We're taking a different perspective. First, with Feng Shui and whatever Hippocrates wanted to name his thing, we have this approach of we want something that feels good. We want to feel good into the flow, as if we build something immediately perfect. But I don't think that matches too much the way we build, at least applications today. I think we'll go more in a trial and error loop, where we want to optimize to remove friction. And so Henry Dreyfus was focusing on that, and he introduced a lot of the cognitive science. He didn't create cognitive science, okay, but his work led other people, scientists, to work on cognitive science. So we can base what we want to improve on UX based on science, on actual facts, on things that we can measure on people, how we react. And then a few years later, we have Donald Norman talking about UX. So he coined the word user experience, saying that there was no word really explaining what all these things together mashed were. So that's how the UX, the word, came in. And I want to go back to this friction idea, okay? I want to go back to the friction idea in the context of a browser. When we think about a browser, the main point of entrance is the URL, which is already a point of friction when you think about it, because the first thing you do when you enter anything on a URL is wait. So you're already in kind of friction. So for example, if we take this website, which is a static website, it's going to take some time to load. I did change the network to make it work, not going to lie. But by Henry Dreyfus' definition I showed before, we already fail, basically. The tool as a browser already failed because it has so much friction. The only thing we face is friction. Everything that loads has friction. Of course, I'm playing a little bit with the words. It's not really like that. And I want to know one thing. Who knows this website? A couple of you. So for those who doesn't know, this is the Space Jam website from a movie from 1996. So a Looney Tunes plus Michael Jordan movie. This was 1 year after JavaScript came out, and 1 year before the standard of JavaScript came out. So obviously, this is static. There is no JavaScript at all. And it does load fast. But what I want to know also is, who had a good impression, like a good feeling, a good vibe, like who had a positive feeling when they see this website appear? Only a couple of hands. Who had, and you can have a neutral opinion, so don't raise your hand if that's the case. Who had a negative impression? Okay, almost, no, a little bit more than the positive one. What I want to talk about here is this visual aspect is the subjective part of the UX. There is a part which is subjective. It's going to be the design. And it's also related, you can relate it to halo bias. So it's a cognitive bias that makes us believe that everything around something that we consider beautiful or aesthetic, it's better. So for example, this happens also with people. I think the most interesting data was people getting lower, how do you say in English this word? Lower sentences in prison because they were handsome or pretty. So, but it does apply to any product. It applies to things that are non-people. We are going to think that the application is faster or more intuitive because it looks better, which is not actually the case. And usually what happens is that as you use an application, you realize that you were a little bit lied by it. But let's actually use this website. So how does it look like? Because the interesting thing that I haven't told you about is we form an opinion on something on a website we visit for the first 50 milliseconds we see it. Now, I want you to think about it. In that time, we don't even have the JavaScript loaded. Okay? So maybe your page is white. It's just blank. But the idea is, in that time, the user already formed a first impression on your website, and that's going to impact how they perceive the actual user experience, even though it doesn't have anything to deal with it. Because if it's the first time they use it, then it's going to have an actual huge impact. So here in the Looney Tunes, what I want to show you is that the Looney Tunes website, the Space Jam, is that every click is going to create friction. Every single interaction is going to create friction. Now, nowadays, we don't build too many study websites apart from blogs and documentation. That's why we call this a website and not an application. But if we build applications, we have a lot more of a synchronous state happening all around. We have all these errors that can happen also when we load. Whether here, if you have an error, you just have a small image that appears like a blank thing. So it's very different. And I think that state management or data fetching can look very simple in Vue. You could say, oh, I just await whatever function I want to await that gives me the data. And I can do that unmounted if I want, or I can do it outside and use suspense if I want to handle any loading state. Because this is the easiest version of data loading, no error handling, nothing, just the content, if it's there. If it's not, blank. The thing is with suspense is that it has been used a little bit too much in the past years. I think it started with Facebook. It's one of the main websites that we're really using a lot. And there is one thing when everybody starts using the same thing, is that some people are going to use it right, and some people are going to use it wrong. What does it mean wrong? So you have tons of library showing these. Basically, you design a kind of placeholder of what the content is going to look like. And this avoids layout shift, and it can be really cool. It just keeps the user into the page so they don't look away from it. If it's fast, it's fine. But if it takes too long, then the user starts to wonder. And I don't know about you, but when I see a placeholder that stays there for a bit too many seconds, I freak out a little bit, and instinctively I just open the DevTools and see if I see any red on the console, just because a developer kicks in. But a regular user or in the phone, you don't see that. So you're like, oh shit, what did I do wrong? And you completely lose any trust on the website, right? is done. You probably close the website and do something else, or use something else. And you don't want to lose, of course, the trust of your users because they're never going to use their website again. So there is nothing worse in UX that losing a user on the first usage. So personally, it's not a pattern I really like, but I still think it's fine for when you use it right. The issue is that we don't handle also unexpected errors. We don't give the user a feeling that they are in control. They just are hanged a version of that doesn't give any information. And any unexpected errors that might happen, like this hang state, will create a lot of frustration. So our goal is to avoid that, but also to reduce the wait time. And so how do we reduce wait time? We can make our operation, asynchronous operation faster. So yes, you can optimize your server. No, you don't need to write it in a native language most of the time. But this is not going to be the topic of today, of course, because we're not going to write server code. We're going to write client code. But we can use some little tricks that are actually really easy to do. One of them is starting the operation sooner. And the other one, which is my favorite, is making them feel faster. Not actually making them faster, but just feel faster. So I'm going to show you today how to do this, not the first one, the two other points with Piña Colada. But first, what is Piña Colada? It's a plugin built on top of Piña. I want to know who knows about Piña Colada? Okay, no, a little bit. Who has used it?
It's a drink, no?
It's a drink, yeah. Who has used it? Okay, cool, a few people. So it's a couple of primitives that are going to allow you to handle async state management better than just writing your own version of async state management. Who has written their own async state handling in a store? A few more people. So this is usually the main depth I see in projects I work with, is their custom async state management inside of a store. And yeah, we brought so many developers. We now have 125 stores. Please help us. And usually, yeah, it's a big work of a few weeks of refactoring. But I'm sorry for them. So my idea here is to show you a way to handle async state management with these primitives. We have a cache, what we call a query cache. We have use query, so we have queries, which are going to be the read operation. We want to read from the server any data or any actual storage. Per se, you can just get the data and display it somewhere. So use query is going to give you access to all the state, the async state, but a few extra things as well. And then we have mutations, which is going to be the opposite. You want to write the data to the server. You want to persist that somewhere. And last but not least, we have a light but extensible API. Piña Colada is less than 3 kilobytes gzipped, so it's very, very light. And because it's built on top of Piña, it has a very extensible API. You can actually subscribe to any action on the store because the query cache is a store. So it can detect whenever an entry is created, whenever it's fetched, whenever it's canceled, whenever it's untracked. There is a lot of things you can do. And so to give you a glimpse of what it looks like, we have this useQuery function that requires two parameters, or two options rather. We have the key, which is going to identify in the cache the data that we're saving into the cache, and then with the query, which is an asynchronous function that returns the data, as simple as that. So can you use GraphQL, can you use fetch, can you use WebSocket? You can use anything you want as long as it returns the promise. That's the answer. And then it's up to you to create your own abstractions. It doesn't want to stay in the way of your abstractions. So the key is going to be very important because, as I said, it's what allows us to say in the cache the data is here, and this allows us also to reuse that in other places. I'm going to talk about it in a moment. And then we have the query function, of course, which is there is no data without a query function, so it's needed. But then we have, among other things, we have the state and the async status. So the state is going to give us access to everything we need, and the async status allows us to display, if we want, a loading indicator. So there is nothing in the template dictated by Piña Colada. You just bring in your own stuff, okay? Because the idea is give you access to all these declarative goodness that you can put into your template, in your interface. There is no silver bullet, as you're going to see throughout the talk, for a good UX. You really have to adapt to your application, how it works, what are the operations the user are trying to do. And there are a few good practices that you can do and bad practices you should avoid, but there is nothing that works in every single scenario. So you can display a loading indicator, and then we can have this status check. Do we have an error? We display an error. Otherwise, we have a success, maybe. We display the data. And otherwise, if you want, you can display a skeleton or whatever other version of a loading state you want to display. And this state is actually derived from some state machines, but I don't want to get too deep into that. The idea is you have 3 different possible states. The pending, where nothing exists. The success, where data exists and error is null. And the error, where you have a data if we came from a success state, because queries can reevaluate on themselves as time passes. We're going to talk about that also. And we also always have an error, because that's the point of an error state, right? So we have a lot of things into the query. We have many other properties. You can actually add your own through plugins as well. We have these 3 convenience access for the error, the state, the status, that are just like computer properties of the state, not that much. And we have refresh and refetch, which are a little bit different from each other. That's why we have 2. One is always going to fetch, and the other one is always going to try to reuse whatever is in the cache if it's fresh. That's why it's called refresh. But also, because we have this centralized version based on the key, no matter how many times you call refresh, for example, you still have just one call. And this is true even if you call refresh in different components. In reality, they're actually returning even the same promise, because they are going to reuse the call that you have. And so this is one of the main points. This is one of the main advantages of this approach, is a centralized data. So why is this so important? When you go into a profile, for example, on GitHub, or any other profile, you update your picture, your avatar, and you don't see it updating on the navbar. How do you feel about the application? Can I trust this application, right? Not so good. Or when you do an operation and only partially the interface updates, it's the same issue. And the solution is very simple. It's just they should be shared, right? This information is coming from the same source of truth, so it should be the same source of truth. That's simple as that. So the centralized data is going to be the query cache. This is where all the queries are stored and where we're going to fetch, and not even in the JS sense, but we're going to get all the information from. And so it's a client cache, okay? It's not a server cache. And so this is an interesting point, is that when we talk about cache, we often think how I am going to optimize my cache so we don't fetch that often. We want to fetch less. But a client cache, so that's true for a server cache. You want to avoid fetching too many times. A client cache is actually the opposite. You want to fetch more times. You just want to do it smartly, okay? Because you want your data to always be up to date. That's the point of the front end, is to have an always up to date interface, not to do as little, as few possible fetches as possible. And everything is going to revolve around this concept of fresh or stale data, which is the same as in a server cache, okay? The idea is that your data is either fresh or stale. And we define that by using the stale time. So after, in this case, 5 seconds, the data is going to become stale. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be refetched immediately, okay? It just means that on the cache is going to be tagged as stale. And if for any reason we need to reuse this data again, for example, a new component mounts and it's using this query, it's going to automatically refetch for you. And this is also going to be one of the interesting parts. And why the query function doesn't have any parameter is because we want the query to be able to execute on its own. We want to be able to refetch automatically without having to worry too much about it. We configure it with the stale time and other properties to say, I know more or less that after 5 seconds, this data is likely to be outdated. If it's not outdated, it's fine. It's just going to do another fetch. But at least you know that when it is, you're going to have an up-to-date interface. Of course, this is the declarative approach. But when you are working on your application, you also have some cases where you know that things are going to be outdated. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a story. A story about an airport in Houston that maybe some of you have heard about. In this airport, they were getting bad reviews, a lot of bad reviews, because people were waiting a lot of time. What was happening is that they were getting off the plane. They were walking 1 minute to pick up their luggage. And then, because the airplane has to just get off all the luggage and put it onto the, whatever you call this in English, but the whole pickup luggage. Sorry, I couldn't hear the word. What? Carousel. Carousel. People will have to wait 7 to 8 minutes there. And so this wait was just too much, because what do you do when you're waiting for your luggage? Nothing. You're just there, you check your phone, maybe you talk with a friend, with family, whatever. But it still feels like wasted time. So what do? They move the plane further away from the carousel. And so they made people walk for 7 minutes, and then they have the time, because they use the car, so it's just faster to bring the luggage to the to the carousel. And people just have to wait for 1 minute to the luggage. And so suddenly it was like, this is so fast, I just had to wait for 1 minute for my luggage. Amazing. Now for me personally, I still wait 30 minutes to 40 minutes in Paris every single time, and I deal with it, and I think this is just life. Maybe in the US they have amazing airports, I don't know. And you're maybe also wondering, how does this apply to web, right? What is this airport experiment? The idea is that we get tricked into thinking we wait less, but we still wait. Sometimes we still wait. And we can see this also in other concepts, like the elevator, where you have the mirrors, because you can do something while you're in the elevator waiting. And so it feels like you spend less time waiting because you're doing something else. You're just keeping your head thinking about something else. Because we know that we have no other option than waiting. So what do I want to talk about? Well, how do we apply this to web? We apply this to web by following some studies. So by Jacob Nielsen in 1993, where he ran some tests to measure how do we react to wait times in interfaces. Okay, this is specifically to interfaces. And under 100 milliseconds, the user doesn't feel a difference. Okay, so when they do an action and the response takes under 100 milliseconds, for them it's the same as instant. Under 1 second, they stay in their flow of thought, but they realize that there is some delay happening. Then we have between 1 and 10 seconds where the user might think about something else. Okay, they might think about, oh, what do I have to do afterwards? But most of the time, they still stay concentrated, focused on the task. Over 10 seconds, however, they're probably going to do something else. So if they are in your application and your thing takes 10 seconds or more, you go somewhere else. What do you do when you wait for ChatGPT to generate something? Do you stay there just watching how it types things? Which is also a trick to make you feel like things are going faster, because you can wait while you see how it types. No, right? You just go to another tab and do something else. You do all the work. For example, if it's generating an image, you're not going to have the image until it's generated, right? So you just have no choice. They try to show you more or less sometimes, but still worthless. So in web, if your operation is less than 100 milliseconds, you should never show a loading spinner. This is only just disturb the user. It's going to flash in the face of the user, and they're just going to feel confused, or it's just things just moving around. It's never good. It doesn't feel good. Under 1 second, you should let the user know that things are loading, but maybe be a little bit subtle, right? So keep in mind that when you show a loading spinner, it might have some layout shift on your page. You want to avoid that. You have a lot of ways to show loading spinners, and you can avoid this layout shift. Over 1 second, you should definitely always show that things are loading. You know that you're waiting. You know that your operation takes time. Show the user that they have to wait. They want to know what is happening. They want to be kept into the loop. Okay? Over 10 seconds, get creative. Okay? You have to find something that adapts to why is it taking so long. For example, with LLMs, you know that this is why we have stream response, because we can show things as they go. So for the user, even though they're not going to use the application, they can still see that something is happening. And this is crucial. This is how you feel that you're in control. You feel like the application is working. If it suddenly stops, then it's like, oh, is something happened? And you open the DevTools and see if there is an error. You don't want to do that, right? So in Pina Colada, for example, we have this plugin, Delay Spinners. And what it does is automatically allows you to delay any loading state. So by default, it's activated. I think I activated it. I might deactivate it by default or change the value. But you specify this time in milliseconds, and it means that the loading state will not appear as loading in your async status it will only appear as loading after 400 milliseconds. So let me give you a demo. This is without the plugin. So you're going to see that I have some operations going on. You have some flashing happening. The operations are fast. I have some error and automatic also refreshing, but that's another topic. That's another plugin. And the user interface is not great. Okay, this is not what I'm trying to tell you. But as you can see, you have these fetching appearing, loading appearing, and they disappear very quickly. Now let me show you the version without that. The version where you just type, well, I did a typo, and I get feedback immediately. Now suddenly, it feels faster. Okay, so there are studies. Of course, I'm showing you the two of them right now, so it might not be the same for you. You might be a little bit skeptical, but there are studies that show that it just feels faster because you don't get a feedback of things loading, so it feels instant. It's just as simple as that. And this is just one plugin, right, that you can write. And I'll talk about the plugin a little bit later. I'll show you the code because it's really cool how you can intercept all these things. You can even change the internal values of the state with the plugins. And then we have mutation. So before I was talking about fetching things ahead of time and how you want things to refetch automatically if you know they are outdated. And I was saying something about sometimes you know that your data is outdated. And this is where mutations are coming in, because when you mutate your data, you know that you're changing something in the server. So if you read it anywhere else, you know it's outdated. Sorry. So the mutations are a little bit different because they are not going to be called automatically, right? You cannot call the mutation automatically. They are a response to an action of the user. So they can take any amount of parameters, or no, I think it's just one parameter, but you can put anything in there, and it will be available inside of the mutation. And you should actually pass that because it's going to be a crucial part of information related to the operation the user is trying to do. Then you get access to a very similar state, very similar set of properties with the use query, so you can use the same abstractions, okay, for loading state or data displaying errors, etc., etc. And you call the function whenever you need. Now, in most applications, you have both queries and mutations. Of course, you might not have mutations, and in that case, you want to rely a lot on stale time. For example, if you're using an external API that updates the data every day, or maybe even less, you probably want a very high stale time. Not 1 day, not 24 hours, but maybe half a day, something like that. You have to balance in things like how long are people going to keep this tab open on their browser. And the mutations are also going to have a very different behavior because they are more prone to errors. And because of that, we also have hooks that we can put things in, so have side effects, sorry. One of the main things is what I was talking about before, is when we update a to-do, for example, or a document, whatever data that we have, that is also queried in our application, we can immediately tell our query cache, hey, I know this data is not up to date anymore, okay? And we can do as little as this, as invalidating all the queries that can be affected by this data. Most of the time, we know the queries that are affected. And this is why we have also these arrays key. I don't know if you noticed, but the key could just be a string, right? So why is it an array? It's an array because we have hierarchical structured keys, which means that when you pass this partial key to functions like invalidate queries or set queries data, other things like that, it's going to match more than one query. So, for example, for the key contacts, we're just that single entry on the array. It's going to match contacts itself, but also anything that has something after contacts. That's why I passed the exact true, because I was specifically to match just that contact entry. But it also matches partially objects. If you have, so contact ID is a number or a string, but if it was an object, like for example, search filters, right, or pagination, you could match partially these filters. You could have some filters apply, like for a shop, it will be clothes, like pants, or usually they filter by kids, women, men, etc. So you can have all kinds of structured keys that allows you to have a very good control over how to invalidate these data. And when we invalidate the queries, what happens is that they are made stale in the cache. If any query is going on, they're canceled, because we know for a fact that this query is fetching outdated data. And if they are active, if they are being used anywhere in the application, we refetch them automatically. We just trigger another fetch. So this is also an important part here, is that because servers can be built in so many different ways, and sometimes you don't have a full control over your server, one of the goals of Pina Colada is not to get too high into the abstraction. It gives you access to the primitives to just get the data again, which is, I think, is the lowest you can get in terms of abstraction and the most flexible you can get. Because this way, you don't have to normalize a cache, which is also another way of handling a cache, but it makes you pay the price in front instead of after. Here, no matter how your server evolves, if you have depth, if you cannot normalize your data from the server, which happens a lot, you can still invalidate multiple queries, you can still adapt. So this is one of the strengths that I really like. And another version of delaying, of having a little less of delay, is predicting the future. Now, this might sound a little bit arrogant or weird, but we actually already do this with prefetching. We know that the user is going somewhere. We prefetch the data, so we don't want to fetch it again. And then it looks like they are spending less time loading. But we can also go a little bit further with optimistic update. So what are optimistic updates? Let me give you an example. I think it's easier. So my internet shouldn't be too fast, which is going to be great. Can I show the zoom? Nope. There we go. So this is a small demo from Sebastian in Nuxt. And the basic demo looks like this. We have a to-do list where you can add things. And you're going to notice something. As I add things, the input here becomes disabled, which is something, personally, I hate. It happens also on GitHub. When you submit an issue, it just disables. If you have a low network here on the train, something like that, you cannot use the application while this happens. You cannot do another comment. You cannot work more effectively, which I think is in general a bad practice. But in some cases, it actually makes sense, because you shouldn't be able to do anything else until you are validated the creation of an entity, for example. The thing is, as you can see, the data is added once the thing is validated on the server, once I have the response from the server, and everything is validated, everything is correct. With the optimistic version, I can just go as fast as I want, and things are added on the fly. So the same happens from all the states here, and the deletion as well. Now, I don't know why I don't have the toast. I think Sebastian probably removed the toast, because I told him in the last talk in Vue Amsterdam that this was very ugly. Unfortunately for me, it helped me make a point, but to show how things come after. But here you cannot see it because it's just instant. Now, if you are very quick, you might see that when I'm adding something, they appear a little bit grayed out. If you pay attention, they appear grayed out a little bit for just a couple of milliseconds. So why do I do this? I do this because I still want to show, in a way, the loading state, but I don't want to distract the user. Anything that animates, anything that changes too much color is going to attract the vision. This is just primitive animal behavior we have. So by adding this subtle difference, we're still showing off that things are loading. And if the user actually takes the time to look at what is happening in their application, they're going to see that. They're going to see that something is loading. So they have the feedback, but it's subtle. They are not triggered by the feedback. They go see the feedback. There's a big difference. What else do I want to show with these? I think that was all. Can I go back? So how does the code look like? It's a lot more than you might imagine on the first glance. So we still have the mutation happening here, fetch, trim the text, and we send the fetch. And then we have these onMutate hooks, which is going to happen when we mutate. So it happens before calling onMutate, before triggering the actual thing, just like in HTML, when you click on click or on submit, it happens before the actual submission. And then what we do here is we clean up the form so it can be filled again, and then we just put this data into the cache. Okay, we persist the data to the cache, so anywhere these to-dos are used, they're going to reflect that information. And we have a little trick. I don't know if I highlight it. No, I'm not highlighting. If we have a little trick here to know that we are on a data that doesn't exist on the server. It's the negative ID. Now, of course, you can just add a Boolean property as well, okay, and just do what makes more sense to your data. And then what you do is create this new version of the to-dos, and you set the query data, you persist that. And you cancel any ongoing queries of the to-dos, because you know for sure that they are not up to date anymore. And then you return all these properties so you can access them in all of the other hooks. And this is going to be important because you want to be able to control how do we handle errors, how do we recover from errors, etc., etc. So on success, we know that data is correct, so we can, or not. So honestly, you have a lot of versions you can do, and this is one of the strengths of Pina Colada, is that it lets you really use as much as you want from the API. You can take that information that came from the API, the response from the mutation, and you just put it into the cache directly. So you replace this negative version that you had on the cache, and you put the one that comes from the server. And a toast, why not? A toast. On settle, so whenever the mutation finishes, whenever errors or succeeds, you still want to invalidate the queries. You might not want to do this all the time, depending on how expensive the query is on the server. But the idea is that you might as well just ask the server for the whole data again, just in case, right? It's just simple, and this is why I was showing before the invalidated queries before, is because it's the most simple version of invalidation you can have. Now, this version is, the optimistic update is to go even further, to try to predict the future, as I like to say. And so we have the error, which is the chunk here, the big chunk of the code, optimistic updates, is how do we roll back to the previous version, or how do we handle the error? Do you want to show the user's retry button? There are so many versions that you can do, and there is no one silver bullet again. And yeah, so here the small trick we do is we check that the version in the cache is the one we actually wrote a few milliseconds before. If it's not, it meant someone else wrote to the cache in the meantime. So we probably don't want to roll back our version because it's no longer up to date. Anyway, the query cache, it's really what allows us to make everything in Pina Colada work. And so, for example, the Pina Colada plugin I showed you before is just I don't know, 100 lines of code. So you have this query on action, which is Pina functionality. A lot of people sometimes forget that Pina is not just having SSR and DevTools, it's also all the plugin API that brings into the stores. And you can check the name of the actions. You have create, you have fetch, extend, and other things. And you can create new properties, so it does require a little bit of knowledge about Vue, FX scope, and other more advanced features, but you can get there easily. You add these things. So for example, I'm adding isDelaying to the extensions. So when you call useQuery, you have a new property alongside data, state, loading that is there to know if you're delaying. And then we have this custom ref, and we replace the native async status with our version. And then we just watching the version. Of course, it has full types safe control, so you can add properties to the types and they will appear, makes things look correct. To summarize, in Pina Colada, we can, and in general, even if you don't use Pina Colada, right? You want to avoid showing loading state too quickly. This is the base. I think this is very easy. You should always do it. It's not too hard to implement. And it's the only one silver bullet, I would say, that we can have. You should use centralized data to show consistent dates, okay? Consistent data, so you don't make your user lose trust in your application by showing things that are partially updated. That feels really bad. You want to invalidate queries as soon as you know data has changed, so you can let the query automatically refetch things, and you don't have to do anything. And because you are going through the query cache, you can have this decentralized version. You don't need to know where your query is being used. You just need to connect through the key, and that's the interesting part. And use optimistic updates if you really want to go a step further, okay? Optimistic updates can be a lot of work, but as I showed you before, it can be very fun if you have, especially when you want to work on applications that are used more on the phone, that are used when the user are on the move. You know that you're going to have inconsistent network and things are going to delay. So having this instant feeling that you can roll back really makes the application feels faster. And last but not least, get creative, okay? This is why I was also talking a lot about ergonomics in the real world, about the Houston airport thing. We still live in a real world, or at least we think so, but we relate to things that are physical, okay? So we inspire from these things, and we mimic the physical things into our interfaces. Even the mouse itself and buttons are just representation of real things. So sometimes touch grass. Just see what other technologies are doing. Sometimes it's interesting, and you can adapt to your own applications. An example I really like is in video games. The loadings are very different. For example, level of details, LOD. You have models load progressively as you are closer to them, so that they can be loaded faster, and you don't have super long loading screens like Fallout 4, who has horrible loading screens. And also, they get creative with the spinners, or they show you something to get distracted with. In every single game, you have some cute spinner with something from the game, or sometimes you have a tip from Mario. Oh, you can press Y to jump, or whatever. So, yeah, this is just to distract the user, okay? Get creative. Sometimes you cannot make your operations too much faster, but you can distract the user. This is the last resort in a way, okay? But yeah, get creative, touch grass, and enjoy from real things. And thanks for your attention.